This video is sponsored by Squarespace. This is Link. Link is very sad right now. You know why? Because he's sick of hurting all those stupid goats. He's sick of them constantly escaping the pens. Why do they keep escaping the pens? It's like that every day. One moment they're there, the next, boom. He's decided to quit his job once and for all and pursue his true passion in art. But he doesn't know where to start because he's only a farm boy and has never touched a computer in his life. Well, you're in luck, Link, because right now, if you click the link in the description, squarespace.com/NintendoBlackCrisis, you can use code NintendoBlackCrisis to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Squarespace includes numerous easy-to-use tools allowing anyone to create their dream website. Trust me, if I can do it, anyone can. You can also monetize your content with paid areas or connect social media accounts so that those posts appear on your website. Personally, I kept mine simple with text and images, and even then I'm very impressed with how it's turned out so far. One great tip I have for newcomers is, if you have no idea what to do for your website, you can start by using one of Squarespace's many templates and rework it to fit your own needs. For example, I've recently added a page all about my secondary YouTube channel which provides people with high-quality, no-commentary game playthroughs to use in video editing. And everything you see here was accomplished just by using already made templates and making adjustments to them. Haha! Yeah, Link, that's a picture of you. And doesn't Epona look so dashing today? So what are you waiting for? Saving the princess can wait. Just click the link in the description and use code NintendoBlackCrisis to save 10% off your first purchase. That's squarespace.com/NintendoBlackCrisis. And now, to today's video. The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. It's a game that I've only recently replayed for like the second time in my whole life. And it was one of the first Zelda games I beat back in the day, alongside others such as Ocarina of Time 3D and A Link Between Worlds. It was a game that I always intended on going back to, but I just kept putting it off since it's one of the longer Zelda titles. This time I experienced the game in its full 1080p glory, and I'm glad I did. All I can say is expect more Twilight Princess content on the channel. But enough of that, let's get to the topic at hand. Dungeons. There are tons of them in the series, and for this video in particular, we're going to be looking at half of them in Twilight Princess. And joining me today is the one, the only, BanditGames. So once you're done with this video, make sure to head over to his channel where we cover the dungeons not mentioned in this one.
As with many Zelda games, dungeons typically fall into one of two categories: those that get plenty of love by the devs and are remembered by the players, and the ones that are clearly not the favorite child of the bunch. Factors such as a dungeon's gameplay, aesthetic, and yes, even lore play a huge part in whether or not that experience sticks with the players. While this does result in masterpieces such as the Ancient Cistern or the Forest Temple, others such as Twilight Princess's Goron Mines are sadly neglected, especially in the lore department. I mean, look at this list. Of all the dungeons shown, this is clearly the least dense when it comes to lore, but that doesn't mean we have nothing to work off of. According to Goron, the acting patriarch of the Goron tribe, the light spirits entrusted them with one of the fused shadow pieces, which was then stored away deep within the mines. However, the four elders and Patriarch Darbus were forced to investigate the mines given Death Mountain's recent violent behavior, which is likely due to the fused shadow. After touching the ancient relic, Darbus was transformed into a twilight monster and sealed within the mines, much to the dismay of the Goron elders. Worried for their safety, the tribe cut ties with Kakariko Village, requiring Link to acquire the iron boots and beat the acting patriarch in a sumo wrestling competition, with his victory granting him access to Death Mountain as well as their sacred mines. The dungeon itself is made up of numerous smaller rooms that are connected to two much larger exterior chambers. Most of them are either filled with lava or water, along with mining equipment. In fact, much of this mining process appears to be automated through the use of machines, most notably the massive cranes in the two central locations. There's also the rotating platforms, including a giant one situated right outside of the mini-boss chamber, a complex pipe system, and BMOS, which have taken on a much more robotic appearance in this game. Goron mentions that the mines are filled with traps meant to keep outsiders away from the dungeon, so it's likely that not all of these contraptions were built for the purpose of mining. Some of it exists simply to ward off intruders. You couldn't even get as far as past the first room since it requires you to deactivate the pipe spewing fire, which can only be done by pressing a switch that's far too heavy to weigh down unless the one doing it is a Goron. It's rather odd to see such technologically advanced machinery in these mines, as the Gorons tend to do any mining or excavation work manually, given their brute strength. And the times we do see them clearing out chunks of rock, it's using their bare hands rather than any sort of equipment. Not to mention that in Ocarina of Time, the two dungeons of the Gorons, Dodongo's Cavern and the Fire Temple, are both severely lacking in terms of technology. At the most, there are some moving platforms and intricate stonework within the latter, but that's nothing compared to the colossal cranes of Twilight Princess's mines. One possible explanation is that the Gorons got help from the humans, which eventually led to the construction of all the technology seen in the present. We already know that, prior to the fused shadow-corrupting Darbus, the Gorons were on good terms with Kakariko Village. In fact, we find out early on that the Gorons are the suppliers for Barnes' bomb shop, and that he's unable to restock his supplies given the current situation. Once Link enters the mines and quells the Twilight Igniter Virus, his business reopens and the player is able to purchase bombs once again. So it's likely that one of the things mined here are materials for explosives. There are also numerous portraits of handprints on the walls of the mines, specifically in the chambers where Link finds the three elders, as well as the entrance to the dungeon itself, and their size suggests them to be human handprints. However, these prints appear to be pressed into the metal itself, and the only species capable of doing so without injury are the Goron, so maybe these are of younger ones? But they definitely resemble human hands more, at least in our opinion. Another indicator of the good relations between Gorons and humans is that, according to Mayor Bo, he once sumo wrestled and beat Goron, who at that time was the tribe's patriarch. Goron says as much when you speak to him. Mayor Bo is also the one who gives Link the iron boots, an item that's required to navigate the treacherous mines. In each of the elders' chambers in the Goron mines, it's worth noting that, just like the entrance, these places also have sumo wrestling rings, as well as mining tools including shovels and pickaxes. There are also plenty of chairs present in these chambers, likely meant for spectators of sumo wrestling matches. However, there's also these stools which feel far too small and frail for Gorons to sit on, so perhaps these were meant for humans. At most, we know that Goron is familiar with the Sheikah Eye emblem, as he's the one that points it out, a tribe which was closely connected to both the royal family and the Uka, a highly advanced civilization that was responsible for the creation of the Temple of Time dungeon, and technology found within, including the Dominion Rod. In fact, the Temple of Time is the second dungeon to include Beamos, but what's interesting is that their appearance differs from the ones in the Goron mines. They have a much more slender, almost futuristic appearance compared to the blocky and rustic-like ones in the mines. The ones in Death Mountain also have the Goron emblem imprinted at the bottom. All of this is to say that perhaps this stuff was constructed by Gorons using information and knowledge passed down through other tribes, such as the Sheikah and the Sky Beings. But this still leaves us with several questions. What about this dungeon made it sacred? Was it because it's somehow related to Ocarina of Time's Fire Temple? Were these mines built solely for bomb materials and nothing more? And when is NBC gonna grace us with his "oh my gosh, is that a Zone Ice World soundbite"? Not to worry, dear viewers, that will all be coming very soon. Now, because Goron refers to these mines as sacred, it makes you wonder why that would be the case. I mean, it's quite literally a mine built for, well, mining stuff. But if this place were to be the same place as the Fire Temple, it would then make sense. Because not only is that place sacred due to its connection to the Seven Sages, there's also the legend of the ancient Goron warrior who slew Volvagia with the Megaton Hammer. A place with such history could no doubt be viewed as sacred. However, remember that the Fire Temple is situated in the heart of Death Mountain. Meanwhile, in Twilight Princess, it's heavily implied that this towering mountain in the distance is Death Mountain. I mean, do you see any other structures such as this that are close by? And right now, this shot is being captured from the entrance of the Goron mines, so while the general area we're in is the Death Mountain region, it's not Death Mountain proper. It's kind of like Dodongo's Cavern, as that place was also not technically inside Death Mountain. Now, even if we were to assume that the Goron mines is the same location as Dodongo's Cavern, why would that be considered sacred? Well, there's a simple explanation for that, although it still falls into theory territory. Recall that these mines were used not only to hold the hero's bow, an item belonging to an ancient hero, but also one of the pieces of the fused shadow, an item so dangerous it's capable of turning the strongest of characters into horrific monsters. And since this task was personally given to them by the light spirits, it's probably safe to say that the Gorons wouldn't want just anyone poking around in their mines. In regards to what this mine was used for, aside from bomb materials, it's worth noting that the cranes used are magnetic, suggesting that the Gorons were excavating some sort of metal. Since many of their platforms are made from metal, they could have been used for construction purposes. Or maybe some of the metal was used as the casing for explosives. We know that Ocarina of Time's Dodongo Cavern was used to mine edible rocks, which might also be true for the Goron mines. There's also the pipe system found all throughout the dungeon. While we don't know much about what it's used for, one possible answer is that they're all connected to the one spewing fire at the entrance. Some of these Yetis could also be pumping lava through the dungeon, or perhaps hot water for the hot springs. In fact, apparently the Gorons make a fortune selling the stuff to the folks at Castletown, so perhaps the Goron mines have something to do with that. One detail that's very interesting is the fact that these two exterior chambers are very different. The wood scaffolding and fewer cranes in the second might suggest that this area is currently under construction, with the other side showing what the end product will be. The fact that certain locations are filled with either lava or water might mean that the Gorons are using the pipes to drain and fill certain rooms. Honestly, there are so many ways to interpret these two chambers. Aside from that, the only other interesting tidbit is this odd script found within the mines, which might be sort of a Goron language. There are also these symbols on the wall, but that's pretty much it when it comes to the Goron mines.
Oh my gosh, is that a Zonai swirl?
See, I told you guys it was gonna happen, although I may have cheated because, you know, I have the script.
In my opinion, Snowpeak Ruins is the most unique dungeon in this game, as well as one of the most unique in the series. A mansion now abandoned and left exposed to the elements of Snowpeak, save for the Yeti couple who take up a small part of the building. By the time Link arrives in the Cold Mountains, he finds out from Yeto that one of the mirror shards was taken back to the mansion and given to his wife as a gift. But not long after, the place was overrun with monsters, with his wife suddenly becoming ill. He was hunting reekfish in Zora's domain to use in a soup for Yeta and invites you over to his mansion. After getting the key to the bedroom, as well as getting a bit sidetracked thanks to Yeta's not-so-good memory, Link must battle against Yeto's wife, who has now transformed into the Twilight Ice Mass Blizzetta, all thanks to the dark powers of the mirror. The story does have a happy ending though, as both Yetis embrace and allow you to take the shard, essentially ridding the mansion of its curse. But who exactly owned this mansion? Certainly it wasn't the Yeti couple, as they seem to have moved in sometime after this place was left in ruins. One of the first things you notice about Snowpeak Ruins is that it's less of a traditional mansion, and more so a fortress. Rooms filled with military equipment such as weapons, shields, and armor. In fact, many of them are frozen into the ice itself. But when you consider the cannons found on the inside and outside of the mansion, as well as the 4 watchtowers, it certainly feels as if this place had more of an emphasis on defense rather than offense. The aesthetic of these rooms also greatly varies. Many of the hallways and chambers are built out of brick with minimal decoration, giving off a functionality over luxury feel, while others, such as the living room and bedroom, were clearly designed with overall comfort in mind. In addition, there's this crest plastered all over the stonework, shields, and numerous decorations littered throughout the Snowpeak Ruins. This appears to be a sort of coat of arms or symbol belonging to Snowpeak Mansion, similar to how the Triforce paired with wings represents the royal family of Hyrule. On the topic of the royal family, it's possible that this mansion belonged to them, given all the military equipment. It might have been some sort of hideout for emergency purposes, especially during the Civil or Interloper War. Many groups had fought to establish dominion over the Sacred Realm and its Triforce. Not only would they be far away from any sort of danger, but the heavy defenses would guarantee that no threats made it as far as through the front door. As a matter of fact, in Twilight Princess HD, the Snowpeak crest can actually be found in the tower holding Princess Zelda. However, this is a detail only present in the Wii U version. Both the GameCube and Wii versions of the game instead have the crest of the royal family. And before you ask, this is not the case for Snowpeak Ruins. It still has that unique crest resembling a coat of arms, with 2 rapiers crossing blades. So what if this hideout wasn't owned by the royal family, but some other wealthy person or people, which had their own personal guard? The first person that comes to mind is Ashai, a member of the Resistance that helps Link with locating several dungeons in the game. Ashai grew up in the mountains with her father, who trained her in the arts of war. This aligns with what we see in the mansion, as it's filled with weapons, armor, and shields. However, she never specifies what mountain she grew up on, and never hints at Snowpeak Ruins once being her home. In fact, the closest she ever gets to the mountain is the entrance. But the Twilight Princess manga tells a different story. In it, Ashai says that the mansion used to be her home, and that it was eventually abandoned by her family. Upon learning that a Yeti couple moved into the ruins, she was first wary of them, but allowed them to stay given their harmless nature. Now, it goes without saying that the manga is non-canon, however, I still wanted to include it in this video. Aside from that, it's hard to know who else could have owned the mansion or if it had any special purposes aside from being a fortress. But there are some details worth mentioning. First are the snowflakes visible on the numerous banners, corners of the pushable blocks, and the bedroom door. This means that, at the time of the mansion's construction, these mountains were snowing. It's not like it happened all of a sudden sometime after this place was built. Second are the portraits found all throughout the Snowpeak ruins. Some of them are rather unexciting, such as pictures of Hyrule Castle, but ones worth mentioning include Queen Rutella, a figure which resembles the Sage of Light Rauru, the Sacred Grove, and City in the Sky. Now, firstly, we're shown what the Temple of Time grounds used to look like, and since this one is of how they appear in the present, it could be used as evidence to sort of get an idea of when this mansion may have been built. But of all the portraits shown, the one of the City in the Sky is definitely the strangest. If this capital is in the heavens, how could a picture of it end up in Snowpeak ruins of all places? Well, perhaps the owner of this mansion is somehow related to a previous messenger of the heavens. Like previously mentioned, the royal family may have owned this mansion, and they were the ones the Uka were in contact with. Unfortunately, we're not given much, but even if this wasn't the case, there's also that picture of the Sacred Grove, another location which would not be so easily accessed by any normal individual. The last thing I want to mention regarding Snowpeak and all of its mysteries are the suits of armor found within the fortified mansion. They're far too big to fit Hylians, so are they only there for decoration purposes, or is there another reason? One thing we have yet to talk about is this dungeon's mini-boss, Darkhammer. In the hallway leading to one of the rooms, a statue comes to life and fights Link with a ball and chain. But when you look at this enemy, it's clearly not human. In fact, it appears to have a tail. It sort of makes me think of a mix between Lizalfos and Dodongo, and the armor fits it pretty well. In some ways, it's similar to the Darknut enemy, as well as the Dynalfos that you fight in the Temple of Time, which also happen to be very heavily armored. Now, this leads into more speculation territory, but perhaps there were some sort of experiments to use monsters as a sort of super soldier. It would explain the remote location, given how this would want to be done in secret, and even if someone did stumble across the mansion, it wouldn't look that suspicious at a first glance. And even if someone did investigate, the heavy defenses would quickly deal with any sort of threat or intruder. I did a video with Zeltic over on his channel covering Snowpeak, and it also talks a bit about this, so I'll have a link to that in the description below if anyone's interested.
Of all the dungeons listed here, the Temple of Time is by far the most interesting when it comes to lore and theories. I mean, it's the Temple of Time, and it just so happens that Twilight Princess's rendition of it is packed with details not seen in the other versions such as Ocarina of Times or Breath of the Wilds. Because unlike those two, this one comes with an entire dungeon. One thing that you'll quickly notice is that the layout of this temple is nearly identical to the one shown off in Ocarina of Time. In fact, the only major difference is the lack of the spiritual stone pedestal. It's also where the hero of Twilight goes to obtain the Master Sword. And don't let appearances deceive you, this is still within the Temple of Time. It's just that so much time has gone by that this area has fallen into ruin and decay. In order to see the temple in its full glory, Link must travel back through time to when this place was still standing. Doing so gives us a much better look at the interior, where the hero must return the blade to its pedestal to open the pathway to the inner dungeon. This is yet another connection to Ocarina of Time's Temple of Time, as that game's Master Sword was also found in the inner chambers. So it's possible that these two structures are actually meant to be the same. Nintendo even uses the exact same soundtrack for the temple in this game. We never get a look at the exterior of this place during this time, so perhaps the area was abandoned and the forest grew around the temple. However, there are some who believe that this is a different Temple of Time entirely. In a 2007 interview with Eiji Aonuma, he states that canonically, Twilight Princess is meant to take place around 100 and something years after Ocarina of Time. Could a forest of this size really grow in that amount of time? I mean, there's also the possibility of it somehow being moved into the woods, but it's hard to get into some other explanations without it falling into just heavy speculation. On a side note, one theory people have regarding Navi's disappearance is that she entered this part of the dungeon. In the credits, you see her fly into this back window, and in Twilight Princess, the bit at the back is revealed to be an illusion hiding the entrance to the Temple of Time dungeon. According to Russell, the Temple of Time was created by the ancestors rulers of the Hylians, an ancient but sophisticated civilization which guards a sacred power. This is later revealed to be the Dominion Rod, an item that's used to control the many statues in the dungeon. According to legend, this rod was passed down by the Uka to the Hylians as a means of maintaining contact with the royal family of Hyrule. The one who held this rod, referred to as the Messenger to the Heavens, would use it whenever the royal family wanted to communicate with the Uka. At the time, this race was no longer on Hyrule's surface, as they had used their technology to ascend to the heavens above. This capital city is later visited by the hero via a sky cannon to retrieve the final mirror of Twilight Shard. Now, while we will be covering some of the lore of the Uka and their technologies as it's closely tied to the Temple of Time, much of it is going to be saved from my video where we look further into the city in the sky as well as the other dungeons. Anyway, this all suggests that the Uka had a hand in the creation of the Temple of Time dungeon.
Poor choice of words, Bandit.
Not only is this temple built around the use of the Dominion Rod, but there are also engravings into the side of the dungeon which depict several figures, one of which is holding the Dominion Rod, presumably the Messenger of the Heavens. Additionally, some script is found at the entrance before the Master Sword Chamber, and it translates to Sanctuary, Stone Statue, Master Sword, and Copy Rod, with the last one referring to the Dominion Rod and its ability to make statues mirror the hero's movement. This also might be related to why this temple was visited in the distant past. Following the completion of the Temple of Time dungeon and returning to the present, Uka states that the magic of the Dominion Rod has been exhausted due to it being around for quite some time. At this point in the game, you're required to seek out the Ancient Skybook, which is then used to restore the rod's powers. According to Impaz, her ancestors were tasked with guarding the book so that it could later be handed to the Messenger of the Heavens, the one who holds the Dominion Rod. This leads into another idea. Perhaps the ones who left these items had no knowledge of when the Messenger of the Heavens would receive them. By constructing the time door, it meant that even if the temple fell into ruins and the rod lost its power, that individual would still be capable of retrieving the Dominion Rod and using it to communicate with the Uka. I mean, they even hid some of the characters of the Skybook across Hyrule, beneath statues that could only be moved with the rod. It all seems very deliberate. Now, whether these individuals knew the events of Twilight Princess would happen or not and prepared for this outcome is, of course, debatable. We do have cases where individuals have prophetic visions, and in Breath of the Wild it's stated that the Sheikah were blessed with the sight of Goddess Hylia. But this is a topic better saved for a later date. It does make you question how a shard of the Mirror of Twilight made its way into the past. Maybe Goma grabbed it and somehow made its way through the door. It is rather interesting how similar this dungeon is to the Wind Waker's Tower of the Gods. Both areas utilize the mechanic of controlling statues while also having their separate versions of Beamos and Armos. Plus, the Temple of Time is also a tower-like structure with a whopping 8 floors. Its entire puzzle revolves around Link climbing to the very top and bringing one of the statues all the way down to the first floor. There's also some similarity to the puzzles, as there are times when the player needs to escort statues to certain parts of the dungeon, and both feature weighing scale puzzles involving the use of these statues. Additionally, the platforms of light in the Tower of the Gods draw a parallel to the one granting access to the inner part of Twilight Princess's Temple of Time dungeon. One other possibility, and one that has been frequently discussed online, is that this extension to the Temple of Time is actually the Temple of Light, a place only briefly seen in Ocarina of Time. It was located within the Sacred Realm, the resting place of the Triforce before it was taken by Ganondorf. The only room we ever get to see in this Temple of Light is the Chamber of Sages, and it's the only temple of the game where we're given its medallion without having to navigate any sort of dungeon, specifically the Light Medallion. In fact, this symbol is found all throughout the Temple of Time dungeon, and is the biggest piece of evidence which supports this theory. And Rauru is said to be the one who built the Temple of Time over the remains of the sealed temple, the Sage of, you guessed it, Light. The second key to this theory, quite literally, is the Master Sword. Link is required to thrust the blade back into its pedestal to activate the staircase leading to the Temple of Time dungeon. A staircase that, may I add, is made from light. It's not too different from how the Hero of Time entered the Sacred Realm, and thus the Temple of Light, by pulling the Master Sword from its pedestal. Whether this truly is meant to be the same place or not is up to the player, but it's very interesting nonetheless.
Wait, this video's already 20 minutes? We haven't even gotten to the Palace of Twilight yet. Let's be honest, of all the dungeons in the game, this is likely the one you know the most about when it comes to lore since, you know, how much it plays into the main story of the game. So because of that, expect this one to be brief. We will go over some bits of it, but really my best recommendation is just to play Twilight Princess as it's a fantastic game. To understand the lore of the Palace of Twilight means understanding the history of the Twilight Realm and events which led up to the banishment of the interlopers. Back then, war broke out between those who wanted to establish dominion over the Sacred Realm and its treasure, the Triforce. Of these groups were the interlopers, said to be powerful magic wielders. But these actions did not go unnoticed, and it wasn't long until the light spirits intervened, using the Mirror of Twilight to banish them within the Twilight Realm. These events led to their transformation into the Twilight race. Now, despite being permanently banished to this realm of darkness, the Mirror of Twilight was left intact at Arbiter's grounds so that a link remained between these two worlds. But as time passed, this mirror became an execution method of sorts to send Hyrule's worst criminals away to the Twilight Realm. It's interesting to think about because this decision was essentially what led to Hyrule's ruin, with the banishment of Ganondorf after his failed execution. I don't think the Mirror of Twilight was ever intended to be used this way, so it's yet another example of the royal family's poor decisions. Fast forward to the moment Ganondorf enters the Twilight Realm, and this is where the events of Twilight Princess kick off. You see, the Twilight definitely learnt their mistakes which had led them here in the first place, and when they realized that Xant's lust for power could repeat said events, he was denied the throne. Ganondorf agreed to give the Usurper King the power he desired, but in exchange, he would fulfill the Demon King's request. To merge shadow and light, and make darkness. Almost immediately, Xant overthrew Midna and transformed his own people into shadow beasts, launching an attack on Hyrule and covering it with a blanket of twilight. He also shattered the Mirror of Twilight to cut off all connections to the realm. However, he could only break it into 4 pieces, for if one wanted to utterly destroy the mirror, one needed to be the true ruler of the Twilight. This is what makes a lot of this dungeon's lore in particular interesting. It's not the Palace of Twilight itself, but everything that led up to it, and how that shaped it to be what it is. This isn't just a dungeon, it's quite literally the home of this race. You can even see several floating islands in the distance, and given that it's possible to tame Kargaroks and fly with them, perhaps all of these landmasses also have residents. I mean, if this is the palace, then where exactly do these people live? It also means that when you fight the Shadow Beasts, you're essentially killing innocent civilians that were transformed into these monsters, all thanks to Xant's dark magic. One topic that's frequently discussed is the identity of the interlopers. Were they a single race? If so, what race was it? 2 of the most common answers thrown around are the Gerudo and Sheikah. Personally speaking, since the interlopers are described as a group of sorcerers, I think it's possible that it was a group consisting of multiple races. I do find the souls in particular to be very intriguing. According to Midna, these items are the equivalent of the sun in the quote-unquote world of light, meaning Hyrule. They're said to be the source of life for the Twilight, and bringing these orbs to the residents heals them of the Shadow Beast curse. When you try to take these out of the Palace of Twilight, Xant's hand pursues the player in an attempt to take it back. Not only is this a dungeon mechanic, as well as nightmare fuel, but it also makes sense since it acts as a sort of security system to make sure no one messes with the Usurper King's plans. One other noteworthy thing found in the dungeon is this dark, foggy stuff. If the souls are viewed as the son of the Twilight, this is the complete opposite. According to Midna, it's made up of the same crystal used to permanently curse Link in his wolf form, and running into the substance forces him to transform regardless of whether he's using the crystal or not. Given that the souls heal the Twilight, and that they also cut through this fog, it may have played a part in how Xant cursed his own people to become the Shadow Beasts. But, as always, who knows? And with that, I'm going to end the video here. Thank you for watching, and I'll have a link to Bandit's video in the description below. And remember, 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain by going to squarespace.com/NintendoBlackCrisis and using the code NintendoBlackCrisis. Anyways, I've been NintendoBlackCrisis, and I'll see you all next time.